All right, so let's get I got a couple of articles here before we get into the weather report tonight. And the weather I kind of cheated with a little bit because we had to talk about Texas and all the severe weather and the tornadoes that we got down there. So that had to make the headlines at least twice tonight. But let's talk about Democrats push Climate Action Now bill. Okay, so here we have a black screen that will show us. There we go. So I'm going to read a little bit about this, and then I have another one that kind of goes with this as well. Not really goes with it, but another Democrat has an action. The Democrat-controlled House of Representatives is set to pass Climate Action Now bill, which seeks to prevent the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Agreement and requires President Trump to prepare an annual report on compliance with Paris goals. Yeah, I'd like to see you guys force that one. I'm pretty sure it's safe to say, guys, as long as Donald Trump is the president of the United States, we won't be participating in any Paris Climate Action Treaty anymore. That is plain and simple. The person that signed this deal did not have the interest of the U.S. people in mind, because if the Obama administration cared about the pockets of us taxpayers, he would have never signed this bill. Many of you don't know that the United States, Japan, and I think Germany was the other nation, was to carry that $181 billion bill, basically. There's a bill that has to be paid every year. And these countries, the United States, Germany, Japan, and I think there was another one I just don't remember off the top of my head, but all these countries throw into the pot. Well, guess who was throwing in the most money in the pot but wasn't receiving any? That's right, us, the United States. U.S. tax dollars designated for a fund to spread out across the globe for people who are fighting climate change because of the belief of this treaty that states that man-made climate change is real. So you're getting robbed at the gas pump when you pay carbon taxes on gas. Okay? You're getting robbed in the grocery stores when the fuel costs more money and continues to go up, and the farmers have to spend more money to harvest their fields and plow their fields, and the truckers have to charge more money to bring the food, and the grocery stores have to charge more money for the food because the owners of the corporations aren't going to certainly dish out the extra money. I mean, come on, let's get real. So anyway, Paris deal, obviously it was a bad deal. All right, let's move on. The bill to honor Paris Agreement goals could be the first climate legislation to pass the White House this year. The House this year, but it won't pass the Senate. And it won't, and even if it does, President Trump is not signing this bill. This bill is going nowhere. This is a waste of time. I don't understand why these clowns in office can't find common ground interest and act on those for a change. And then this stuff right here, this gets put on the back burner, and let's try to make a look. We all know here at this channel, Grand Solar Minimum, that there is no such thing as man-made climate change. So all of this taxation of CO2 and emissions and taxations on, plastic straws and stuff like that, it's all a lie. If they had the mindset of coming out and telling people that we are doing these green policies to help the breathing air and the drinking water, I don't think anybody would have, and they can't sensationalize it. They can't say we have 12 years of the world is ending. So if Democrats and Republicans said, you know what, let's do this. Let's do things that will help keep pollution in our breathing air and drinking water down. Let's take the foot off the pedal because there is no climate crisis, so to speak, that man is causing. And even if there was a climate crisis, we all know that it's nature and nothing is going to stop that. So instead of just taking the money and basing it on a lie, there are real things that we could actually do with this money and help with carbon capture and keeping our rivers pollution free and our air breathable and non-polluted. Those are the things that really matter. But as far as spending trillions of dollars to fight global warming or fight climate change, it's an insult to all of our intelligence. And the people who have fallen for this and are really hardcore believers in it, then we hope maybe that there's some, like a channel like mine or other channels in the community, that speaks to you somehow and you see the clear science. You'll see, if you're not a follower of this channel, let's say you are AGW, you believe in the CO2 theory, and you start to watch this channel, just let's pretend those people actually exist. You're open-minded and you want to learn. And then you start to see the science correlation to everything. And then you have that aha moment. You'll understand that people who don't believe in the CO2 theory are not science deniers. It's the actual opposite. There's way more scientific theory and evidence to what we're talking about right now versus what Noah and other folks like Al Gore and the IPCC and all of these corrupt people out there who continue to cook the books for the numbers to meet the agenda so they can continue to get millions, billions really, of funding, federal grants from the United States government. You, the taxpayer, are paying for the biggest hoax ever to be played on its people in the entire world. Not just here in the United States, but the world. This week, the House of Representatives set to vote on a new resolution aimed at mitigating the impacts of President Donald Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. The bill is known as Climate Action Now, would functionally reinstate the United States. Thank you for doing that. Did not mean that. Here we go. The bill prohibits the Trump administration from using federal funds to withdraw from the agreement. Second, the bill would require Trump to develop a plan updated annually for the U.S. to meet its contributions to the agreement, including greenhouse gas emission cuts by 26 to 2.8% below 2005 levels by 2025, and require that Trump administration work to ensure that other parties to the agreement are fulfilling their contributions. Folks, okay, the problem with that paragraph that I just read you, cooling is a decadal situation. We don't see it in a couple of years. We see it by the decades. And as it continues to cool, all right, the warm temperatures, once we are starting to cool down, all that CO2 in the oceans is being released into the atmosphere. First and foremost. During solar minimums and grand solar minimums, we see an increase of seismic activity and volcano activity. Obviously, the volcanic activity is spewing out ash 20 to 40,000 feet in the atmosphere. That's a problem. But you're probably asking yourself, well, what does an earthquake do to CO2? There's natural concentration amounts of CO2 released from the ground during a major earthquake. So we have contributions of CO2 from temperatures in the ocean. We have contributions from earthquakes. We have contributions from volcanoes. Those are the three main drivers of the CO2. The United States led the way this year, negative 2.8%. So in other words, we were down 2.8% in CO2, man-made CO2 emissions. Now that's a lot, guys. Those of you who know how this works, man-made emissions equivalent to the impact of the climate by about 0.00433. Not even 0.5%. So if man's emissions don't even accumulate for 0.5% of the CO2 that's already in the atmosphere, how does that control temperature? I've already shown you guys charts where we've seen CO2 levels back in 2016 right around the 402 mark, 402 parts per million. And in just a few years, we're at a record high of 412 parts per million on the CO2, but the temperature has dropped a half degree Celsius over the last 3 years. And we'll get to that here in just a minute. So now the Democrats are trying to force the hand of the President of the United States. This was a slow news day. They need to post an article. None of this is going to happen. That's why I'm saying this was a slow news day. This was a waste of a story. Eric, I love you. You do great work. I'm not saying this is garbage, but let's face it. Even if it passes the Senate, President Trump will veto this bill. This bill will never see the light of day. And thank God. And for those of you out there who agree with the message of the grand solar minimum community, but hate Trump, that's a tough one, guys. Because if it wasn't for him, people like Pelosi would have her way and tax the hell out of you, and your gas prices would be $5 a gallon, and they're making these impossible zero emissions in 12 years claims. But now, hold the phone now. Beto has a better plan. Okay? So Beto supports AOC's new Green Deal, right? Well, here Beto wants to roll out his own climate change plan. Now, according to AOC, we have 12 years to reduce our CO2 emissions to an astounding level, or we will die. The world will be over in 12 years because of climate chaos, according to AOC. Many Democrats have jumped on board with this Green New Deal, including this man right here, Beto. Democrat presidential primary candidate Beto O'Rourke is hoping you'll find the $5 trillion cost of his Green New Deal light more palatable than the $93 trillion cost of AOC's deal. He plans to invest $5 trillion over the next 10 years in infrastructure, innovation, and also set goals to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Well, hold the phone. Won't we be dead by 2050 if we don't get to zero emissions in 2030? I mean, that's what AOC was saying. We got 12 years to get zero. And then the number said, well, okay, 10%. And then, well, okay, 30%. And some people are now saying 50% less than what it is now by 2031. Right. Interesting how these politicians flip-flop because they don't know. They don't know how any of this works. They don't understand what is going on here. So here's another politician blurting out whatever he thinks might win. This is less money. This is a $5 trillion plan over 10 years. Guys, I'm going to tell you something right now. The reconstruction of the infrastructure, first of all, $5 trillion isn't even a down payment for the state of New York. Point blank. Point blank. I can only imagine what it would cost in Texas, in Florida, in Georgia, in North Carolina, California. We'll give them a little credit. They're halfway there because their Nazi leaders out there have forced folks in California to install solar panels on their brand new house. If they were building a house, it was mandated that you have to put solar panels on there. Who cares if the technology fails? You have to have it anyway. You have to spend that, and then you'll get a tax credit. But what you're supposed to do with that tax credit money is you're supposed to keep it in a spot where if your batteries fail or your power wall fails or your panels fail, you have this tax credit money that you can just go out and buy a new one. Anyway. Let's see here. Yeah, you can go to the whole thing, CNN, if you really can stomach their website. But here's what they want to do. Re-enter the Paris Agreement. Again, that's the same thing the Democrats want. They want even a more ambitious global plan for 2030 and beyond. So they want a more ambitious global... I'm confused. First it was 2050. Now it's 2030. Which is it, guys? Reduce methane leakage from existing sources. Strengthen clean air and hazardous waste. Limits for power plants. Fuel economy standards. Okay. Strengthen clean air. Hazardous waste limits for power plants. That's fine. That helps keep our drinking water and our breathing air clean. I'm fine with that. That's the only thing about this that I don't question. But a good point at the end. One question, Beto. If you end tax breaks for fossil fuel companies and hike up royalty and compliance costs, because that's what they wanted, that's what Beto wants to do as well. Won't they simply pass the additional cost straight on to the consumers, causing economically damaging spike in consumer fuel and energy bills? Indeed they would. Indeed they would. You know they would. We just talked about at the beginning of the show of food and fuel being more expensive. It is all very well investing in innovation, but maybe you should hold off pushing up the price of fossil fuel until that innovation investment yields a viable and affordable alternative. So bottom line is okay, kid, good ideas, but let's make sure the technology can support what we're actually going for here. Okay, less human emissions, cleaner drinking water, and cleaner breathing air. I get it. I'm for that. But until these guys get real analysts and experts to talk about these policies, they won't understand. And they're not going to be able to put a dollar sign on any of this until they understand what exactly is happening right now. And then when they realize that, okay, so man isn't causing this. This is all natural. So we need to invest in things that are going to help us prep. We need to invest into land that we could use to farm on that we usually don't farm on. We need to use money like that to invest in shelters, indoor vertical growing centers. There's so much we could do with $5 trillion. Infrastructure rebuilding is definitely the best idea in this whole Green New Deal. The only thing I don't like about it is fitting it for solar and wind power resources. That'll never work. Not right now. Not with the current technology. I'm not saying in 20 years from now we don't figure out a battery situation. We don't have 20 years, obviously, but I'm just saying at this pace, you would think it's going to take that long to see affordable and valuable alternative energy. And right now, we don't have it. I like hydro. I think, I hear there's a lot of waste in hydro as well. There's a lot of there's pros and cons in every source of alternative energy, whether it's oil, natural gas, hydro, coal, solar, wind. We know the worst parts about solar and wind. The part I love about coal now is that coal produces CO2, and now scientists are figuring out how to change CO2 into coal. So talk about a cheap source of energy. If you could renew it like that, they used to be able to convert the CO2 into coal at very high temperatures. Now scientists have figured out how to make this transfer at room temperature. They don't need the high temperatures they used to need to achieve this accomplishment. The technology is getting better. We're going to figure it out. But we can't do anything to start or stop this, guys. Don't let any politician, even Trump, we're not stopping this. But what we can do is prepare for it. And what we can do is be smart about the money that we are spending on infrastructure. Instead of putting up a solar panel, let's put up areas that we can have community gardens or invest into buildings that once were empty warehouses and turn them into grow centers for indoor vertical growing. There's all kinds of infrastructure, new sewer lines, street lights, power poles. I mean, look, this year alone, we've seen a lot of moisture, all right? And there's been several reports throughout the year where several phone poles, hundreds at a time, will collapse and fall over because the ground's saturated and the wind gets blowing, and the force of the wind and the saturated grounds allows these phone poles to tumble like dominoes. Scary. All right, let's continue on. Climate news. Dr. Roy Spencer, who we think highly of here at the Grand Solar Minimum. And here we have our temperature readings for April 2019. And we are up a tenth of a degree Celsius above baseline. And I'm sure all you out there, you AGW, are jumping up and down, throwing popcorn at the screen right now. It's warming. Look, it's warming. No, look, it's climbing down in the natural process that this happens at. Let me get my handy dandy arrow out. Let's point this out real quick, folks. Here we have the peak, 2016. 2017, 18, 2019. Will we see it go up a little bit more? Maybe. Maybe. But look at the pattern of this, guys. Does this trend make it look like to you that it's just going to all of a sudden go right back up and stair step up? I mean, look back at this graph and you tell me where that we've had any kind of activity like this on our graph that shows that all of a sudden out of a decline, like even here, straight down, 1, 2, 3, and then had a fourth one, and then we'd had another dip, and then we go slowly back up, and then kind of slowly back down, and then we go up, and then we go down, and then we keep seeing these peaks right here. But the trend is this was higher, this was a little bit lower, and this one's a little bit lower. And what? Let me guess. By October, we'll be averaging somewhere right here. Probably. If we have to go on trends here, we go on precipitation that has a cooling effect. With all the cloud coverage, thanks to the cosmic rays seeding our atmosphere, producing cloud nucleation. Yeah, we're going to get hot in June, July, and August. I'm sure we're going to have reports on heat wave and drought in parts of the world. But the question is, how long is this going to last? Winter is hanging on for a lot of spots right now. So am I panicked when I see a report like this from Dr. Roy Spencer? And if you understand, well, even if you don't understand, you could still read patterns and look at graphs. And we're clearly still continuing to fall slowly. As I said, 3 years is not a lot of time to observe information like this. It's not fair to make one perception of what's happening. But if you do read these graphs, if you do understand charts, you can clearly see why us and thousands of other scientists agree that our climate is slowly cooling. It takes time, folks. It's not going to be an overnight. When you spread this out over the last 3 years, it continues to peak and drop, peak and drop. Maybe we're due for a little bit more of a peak right here, and then we start to see temperatures dropping again. And October-ish, November-ish could be here. Some think that we'll plateau again and keep this average through 2019 into 2020. Look, obviously you guys know I'm a firm believer in solar cycles. And I'm a firm believer that the sun is the main driver of the climate. And I'm a firm believer that less solar activity leads to cooler temperatures. We'll be right back.
Do you like this show? Give us a thumbs up. Want to support us more? Share to your favorite social media platform. Buy a t-shirt or become a Patreon. All links are in the description below.